Hello and welcome guys to another video, and today we are at Summit Point Raceway for another track guide in the Mazda MX5 fixed series. So this is the track conditions and the weather that I'm using for this Hotlap. I just pressed test drive and just used whatever the default settings were that it gave me. So this is a very simple track for this week. It is very momentum based, so you want to carry as much speed in the corners as you can and try not to scrub off too much speed, and you also want to be as smooth as you possibly can. Smooth is fast in this car and track combo. Coming into the first corner, for our braking reference, we want to be braking between the 2 cones and the 3 cones. So we're looking out for that as we come into the corner. So after we pass the 3 cone and about halfway between the 3 cone and the 2 cone. Now I'm going to shift all the way down into second gear and just trail brake as late into the corner as I can. I do brake a little bit too high brake pressure there. You want to hit about 80%. I hit 90 there, so that was a little bit too much brake pressure. But trail the brakes to about the apex of the corner. You want to avoid this curb because it's quite high, but get as close as you possibly can. As you see, I'm still on the brakes just a little bit and starting to get on the throttle. Getting on the throttle very quick once we know that the car is nice and stable and it's not going to snap out from us. Make sure to use all the track on the exit and then start bringing it back over to the right hand side. Now coming into this left-hander, you want to take it in third gear. You can either do a little lift or a little tap of the brakes and lift. I usually just go for a tap of the brakes and lift. That's usually enough rotation, but depending on the track conditions you can sometimes just lift here. So here I'm going for a brake. The reference is basically halfway between the end of this escape road and the start of this escape road. So about halfway between those 2 escape roads we're going to hit the brakes. As you see, I hit about 45% brake pressure and I'm already off the brakes and getting on the throttle before we even reach this curb. So very, very short braking there. You can use this curb to rotate the car. Just be careful that you don't use too much and unsettle the car. But about what I use here will give you a little bit extra rotation without unsettling the car too much. On the exit here, this is a really nice curb, so make sure you use as much of it as possible. Just be very careful not to go into the gravel and get a 1x. Now coming into this I would say is the trickiest part of the circuit, because you've got this high speed right-hander into a very hard braking for the left-hander. So coming into this right-hander, as you see the track opens up a bit here, so you want to use as much of this as you can. And you want as late and turn in as possible, to open up the left-hander that's coming up. So as you see, we're all the way over to the right here. Our turning point, there isn't really a reference for the turning point. I kind of just do it by feel. There is this board thing. I don't even know what it is, to be honest. But there's, oh, it's an advertising board. Just before that, you can turn in. As you see, this is about where we start to turn in. It is difficult because you're doing this full throttle, that depending on the track conditions and if you've got slipstream from a car in front, this will vary a bit. You can lift slightly for here, especially if the track's very cold and you're struggling for grip, but I found that full throttle is absolutely fine. I use this curb here, and I'm trying to get as far over to the right as possible. You don't need to be all the way to the very edge, but try and get as far to the right as possible. The main thing is that when we hit the brakes, we want to try and brake in as straight a line as possible. So as you see, the line there was fairly straight. It can be very difficult with the load transfer to get it perfectly straight, but we want to try and brake in as straight a line as possible. As you can see, I was correcting the car a little bit because I used just a little bit too much curb there. Coming into this corner, you can usually brake at 100%. Because we're going down a hill, the suspension is quite compressed, so you can usually hit 100% brake pressure. Here I hit about 80%, but when I tested it, 100% seemed to be okay, which is handy to know for overtaking and things like that. Now, trailing the brakes into this corner, you can use a little bit of this curb. Just try and make sure you get on the power nice and early. Here I'm getting on the power. It's about halfway around the curb, 3/4 of the way around the curb. Trying to get on the throttle. And you want to start bringing your car back over to the left. You don't want to drift too far to the right here. So as you see, bringing it back over to the left. And then we just need a little tap of the brakes for this right-hander. Here is where I brake. As you can see, there isn't really much of a reference marker. You've got where this barrier changes here, but there isn't really a definitive braking marker for this corner, so you have to practice it and just see if you can spot any braking markers. As you see again, about 45-50% brake pressure, and I'm using a little bit of a throttle just to stabilize the rear of the car. Now, getting as close to this curb as possible. I don't use this curb just because of how high it is, but get nice and close to this curb and get on the power really nice and early. Now, you want to let the car drift out wide here, but then bring it back into the right-hander in one smooth movement. So as you see, it's drifting out, and then we're bringing it back over for this apex here. So we let it drift out wide, and then we're coming back over to this right one. You can use a little bit of this curb if you want to rotate the car. You don't need to, as you can see there, but in some track conditions you might need it to rotate the car. This left-hander coming up, be very careful with track limits, because I don't know why, but for some reason it's super strict if you use this curb on track limits. So I tend to just avoid that curb or just use a very, very small amount of it. But it's very, very strict, this corner, for track limits, and I'm not really sure why. So coming into this right-hander, I turn in about halfway between this barrier and this barrier. There isn't really a perfect turn-in point on this corner that you can see on the track, but about halfway between those two barriers is where I turn in. So this is where I initiate the turn-in. As you see from the chopper, it's actually in line with the first barrier, but when I look at it from my cockpit view, it's about halfway between the two barriers on my screens. So you just have to get a feel for where the turn-in point is based on your field of view, but that's about what I use as a reference marker. Is basically halfway between this barrier and the other barrier you can't see on my other screen. Now this is a full throttle corner. Use a little bit of this curb to help you rotate the car. Try not to use too much steering angle, and then just let it drift out wide onto this curb. Coming into the final corner now, I shift down into third gear. This escape road, pit entry, just at the end of it here, around there is where I'm making my braking marker for the final corner. Shift down into third gear, try and be as smooth as possible with your downshift, because if you unsettle the car, not only is it going to ruin your current lap, it's going to ruin your next lap as well, because it's the start of the main straight. So you want to be very careful with how you tackle this corner. So as you see, I'm braking just as the end of the pit entry on the right hand side. You can't actually see it because it's on my side monitor, but just at the end of that pit entry, that's where we're braking. As you see, about 50%, and then immediately switching over to the power and getting on the throttle. Again, using a little bit of the curb and letting the car drift out wide. Track limits are super lenient on this corner. I'm not sure if it's this line here that's the track limits or it's the gravel, but I didn't get a track limit the whole time I practiced on this final corner, so it's really lenient on this corner. So as you can see, you can use all this runoff, get a nice exit, and I would say that's one of the most important corners for your race, because if you mess that corner up, you're just going to get destroyed on the straights with the slipstreaming in the Mazda. So that is the corner that if you're battling with someone, it's better to give them that position into the corner so that you can be in their slipstream for the main street, because this straight is so long in comparison to the other straights at this track that you really want to be following a car rather than being the lead car into turn 1. Now, as always guys, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and see you again next time.